Hi everyone, welcome to the Hands-on CISO podcast. My name is Adi, and today we'll be talking to Dimitrius Stergiou, if I said the name correctly. With over 2 decades in security and over a decade as CISO, Dimitrius' information security background is extremely comprehensive, ranging from standards compliance, technical security evaluation, risk management, security development lifecycle, sec DevOps, and social engineering. Currently, Dimitrius is a CISO of TapTapSend Group, and today we'll hear more about his journey and about security as a field. Dimitrius, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you for having me. And you nailed it on the name, which is really not happening that often for non-Greek speakers, but I'll give you a 9 out of 10.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Dimitrius, you've come a long way in security. Can you tell me how did you get started?
Yeah, I think I can summarize it to 2 key points. One is I think I was always a nerd or a geek. I don't think that term existed back in the late 80s, early 90s when I was growing up, but I loved video games and I couldn't afford playing the video games where you feed in the coins. So eventually I bought a computer and I started playing at home, and then I started making my own games. So that got me into computers and into the idea that I want to work somewhere in IT, whatever that meant back in the early 90s. And then I think what got me into security is a combination of working with things like Linux and networks. And also, I'm not going to hide it, like I was heavily influenced by things like movies like War Games and Hackers back in 1995, I think. That looks very interesting and very exciting thing to do. So I started as a system engineer who gradually moved into what today we would call, I think, IT security, and then gradually made it into information security. In the past 15, 16 years, I have been working as a CISO for a number of companies.
Amazing. And did you see a big difference between different companies when you were in your CISO years already? Was it pretty much the same where you went, or is it each company very different?
So I think there are some similarities and some differences. Generally, and being a bit cynical, I will bucket the companies into 2 main categories. One is the companies that hire a CISO because they need to have one. They don't necessarily see the need, but because some regulation or some board said, okay, why don't we have one of these roles? They hire a CISO. They don't want a lot of interruption from their CISO. They just want to be able to go through some audits and maybe have the CISO talk externally and things like that. And then the other bucket is the companies that, forced or not, they see a need and they see a value in having someone who runs security, and then they hire you to do exactly that. Now, when it comes to the day-to-day things that you do, they're pretty similar between these 2 buckets of companies, but I think what differs is the mandate that you have and the level of change and influence you can exert on the organization depending on which bucket of companies hired you.
Interesting. I would assume that the companies that value security are the ones that are more enjoyable to work for.
Again, being cynical, it's not a huge difference if you know what you're stepping into, right? So if you know that I'm going to step into this company, I'm going to be able to do little things and I'll try my best. That has its interest because you're giving a very small box to play with and you need to stay within that box, but you still need to achieve some things. And if you are working for the other bucket of companies, you have a much bigger box, but then you have limitations, like you can't have unlimited budget to touch everything in that box and so on. So they both come with interesting challenges. I think the most important thing and what I tell people is make sure you understand what they're hiring you for. If they just want to have you in the org chart, or if they want you to come in and destroy everything and then rebuild it in a better way.
Interesting. What does your day-to-day look like now?
Day-to-day, yeah, it's not very standardized, so it differs. Some days I have a lot of meetings when I need to talk to both internal and external stakeholders. Some days are dedicated to updating or creating new documentation needing for our information security management system. I do spend quite some time with auditors, but that's kind of seasonal. So there are seasons with high level of audits and seasons with low level of audits. Generally talking a lot with people, anywhere from the CEO to a developer, and either consulting them on security terms or hearing what they want to do next and trying to figure out what's the risk there and how we could mitigate it or avoid it early on. Trying to keep up with a lot of things both in terms of what technologies we use, but also what's happening in the world. So an example would be we don't use Microsoft, but if Microsoft is under heavy attack, that might affect our customers, which might reflect on us. So even if I don't use Microsoft, I still need to care that Microsoft is having an issue. So that's a lot of blogs, Twitter, watching videos, trying to keep in touch with several professionals and friends on LinkedIn, like an assortment of things.
Interesting. How do you balance between doing work that is, let's say, work, like really implementing new solutions, managing the team, talking to management, and learning about new things happening, learning about new technologies?
So I do believe in the idea of hands-on learning. So for example, if I want to consult our team on how to implement some piece of code to not have an SQL injection, sure, I can tell them go read the document, but I can also try to write a small piece of code myself and understand why was it vulnerable and why and how can we make it not being vulnerable. And then I can go to them and say, hey guys, look, I'm not a developer, but I wrote these 10 lines and this is bad, this is good. Can you translate that into our actual code base and avoid having this mistake? And that means that I learned something not only about the theory of what is an SQL injection, but also what it's pragmatically, how it's pragmatically implemented or not implemented, but also the developers hopefully look at me and go like, okay, he's not just giving us a standard or a piece of paper to work at, he's willing to work with us.
Interesting. Do you ever feel like a bad cop? Like, is there ever I have to say no?
Oh, I say no all the time, but nobody cares. So let me explain
Why
this.
would you say that?
I'll tell you what I mean. Again, that's one of the things that I try to clarify before I join any company. And I'm explaining that there's two operational models. One is I'm fully responsible for security, which means that I can say yes or no, but that also means that I have the budget and I can override other people in the company. And then, sorry, very rarely any company will allow me to do that. Then the other model, which is very common, is something of a trusted advisor. So someone will say, oh, we need to do this new thing. So I will look at this new thing and say, I see these 5 risks. Ideally, if we don't do this, we don't have to care about these 5 risks. If we do want to do this, here's what we need to do to mitigate these 5 risks or eliminate them. And then I submit that to the business owner, which usually will be someone like a COO or a CEO, and then they can make an educated decision. And if they tell me we need to mitigate, then I will work on my proposals to mitigate. And if they say, you know what, it doesn't worth it, we're going to take the risk, and if it blows, that's fine. We document that and we do that. So that's why I say no, but at the end of the day, not a lot of things are my decision because security is there to support the business and enable the business. And if the business is willing to take a risk after they understand the implications, then who am I to say no to that?
Interesting. So you're saying at the end of the day, I don't make the decision. I let them know what the consequences might be, what the risk is, and then they decide what actually happens.
Yeah, the typical example I give is like imagine you are smoking and you go to the doctor, right? And the doctor says, you know what, that's not good for you. You need to stop smoking. And then it's up to you, right? You know the consequences. The doctor will not come to your house and take your cigarettes away. If you want to listen to the doctor, that's great. You're gonna benefit. The doctor is gonna be happy because you live longer. If you go like, yeah, you know what? Smoking is cool. I don't care about the risk. Then that's on you. Like, what do we want the doctor to do more?
Interesting. Have you ever been part of a company that had a serious breach or a security incident? Of course, no names or anything like that, but have you had to deal with that area?
Kinda. So I joined the company like 1 week after they had the big incident. So although I wasn't present for the incident itself, I had to deal with the aftermath. And the aftermath included both the technical side of how do we make sure that this never happens again and where did we fail when this happened, but also communication, because it happened in a company where our target audience and the people who were affected are extremely technical, geeky people. So they had a lot of questions. It's not like they understand the internet, they understand what the breach is, they wanted to know how that happened. So there was a lot of stakeholder management, both internally but also externally, plus the technical work that we needed to do to never have it happen again.
How do you deal with that kind of situation?
So generally, my approach is being as honest as possible, assuming that the lawyers approve, right? Because from a technical perspective, it's quite easy to explain what happened. So we forgot to do X. That means that an attacker found X and they exploited it and they stole 10 records or whatever. It's very easy to say that. Now, the question is, what are the legal implications of you saying that? And that needs to be cleared by legal and PR people and that type of thing. But after they gave me some kind of guidelines of what I can say and not say, then I tried to be as honest as possible and explain to the users, look, we're all on the internet. Most of us grew up on the internet. We know that bad things happen. We apologize. We're going to be better by doing X, Y, Z. Sorry for the inconvenience. And in the first 2 months, people were really pissed and we saw our subscription base going down. But then after 2 months, they kind of realized that we were being honest about it and we hit the previous level and continued growing. So although it was very uncomfortable, it didn't really affect the company in terms of the company having to shut down because of that one incident.
Cool. Do you think it's common for companies to think they're more secure than they actually are?
I think it's difficult to measure it in a reliable way. So generally you have a feeling, right? So the feeling can be, I have X number of monitoring tools that show everything green. I look around and I see people following the processes. Now, are the processes secure? Hopefully some external auditor will weigh in on that. I feel it's very, very difficult to measure. Like you can identify gaps and say, oh, we don't have a process for X or for Y. But if you have the process, I don't know how you say that makes me 80% secure or 90% secure.
Interesting. So you're saying it's more of a 90 or 10?
I'm saying it's more of a feeling. Like there is some objectivity in theory. So if you go for some kind of certification like ISO 27001 or SOC 2 or these type of things, or PCI, hopefully they do enough checking to say that you have whatever is needed in order. But I don't think that if you look at two companies that went through PCI audit, they will be doing exactly the same thing. So there is some subjectivity from the auditor side there. So that means, like on paper, these companies are equally good, but realistically, one company may be doing 10 more things and therefore hopefully they're better, but this is not depicted anywhere and it's very difficult to see.
Got it. Is there any significant difference between working in a fintech company like you do now and working in a company that's more maybe like regular tech where a data breach isn't as big of a deal?
I think one big difference is for sure the fact that fintechs are way more regulated, is my feeling, compared to previous companies. That means that you look past the typical InfoSec standards like ISO, PCI, SOC 2, or whatever, then you will find that your business is regulated by some sort of either regional or like grand regulator, like an EU entity, which means you have to care about way more things than a company that maybe isn't so much regulated. If you go past that, I don't think it's a huge difference. So at the end of the day, each company uses data to do whatever they do. And in our case, it's financial information. And if you work for a health startup or a health company, it's medical records. And if you work for someone else, it's probably customer information. But like data is data and we need to protect this data. I don't think like the form of the data makes a huge difference. What makes a difference is how many external authorities are interested in how you're doing that.
Interesting. Do you feel like the stress of being, well, actually, I'll phrase that differently.
Mm-hmm.
As a CISO, it sounds like you're always very on, like you're very ready for anything to happen. Do you see a lot of people dealing with stress in healthy ways in the field, or is it something that's less talked about? Do you even experience it?
I think there is a level of stress. The way I try to approach it is with my favorite expression, which is it is what it is. So whatever happens, either I have control over it and I can do something about it, which means there's no reason to stress, or I don't have control over it, which means stressing doesn't help. So give you an example. If I use GitHub, you store my source code, and GitHub dies for 3 hours. It's not great, but what can I do? Like, I'm sure the GitHub engineers are working on it to get it back. On the other hand, if I realize that I have really crappy permissions on GitHub, I can fix it. So again, no stress. So I think, again, it's about expectation management. So like, what is expected of a CISO and what do you think your role is? Obviously, nobody wants to sit in a company where your main partner is down and nothing is working. But then if you have identified that this is a risk, if the management told you, we're not going to buy a second GitHub, like we're not going to get GitLab as well as a backup, then you've done your job. You identified the risk, the company accepted it. You will assist GitHub if they ask you, but why would they ask you? And that's it. And then you wait for GitHub to come up.
That's a very calm and nice approach to it. So that's interesting to hear. Do you, I had a question as you were talking. I don't know, maybe I'll come back later. What do you think right now is one of the biggest challenges in cybersecurity?
So I don't think I can speak for the whole field, but one of the things that kind of stresses me is the fact that everything nowadays is cloud-based or SaaS-based or whatever you want to call it. So back in the day, way back in the day, when people needed something, we'll have to deploy a server in our data center, and we knew exactly what was happening. Today, I'm not sure I can tell you with 100% certainty what we are doing as a company. And what I mean by that is we offer, let's say, our employees 2 services where they can store files and they can exchange files. But I'm quite certain there's a non-zero chance that some people somewhere are using a service that I know nothing about, and they have put some company documents on that service. And then these people will leave the company, and these documents will never be deleted on that service. So that's a bit scary, and we try to manage it. It's easier to be managed if the service requires some form of payment, because we can control that on the finance level. But if it's a totally free service, like let's say Dropbox, if someone has just downloaded Dropbox and they're using it to store documents, I will never know about it. That's the source of a breach. I won't even know how to respond if we are breached by using an unauthorized service. So that's the thing that stresses me the most.
Interesting. What do you think is something that people tend to not really understand when they're not from the security field and they make these decisions maybe to do things that risk the company's position?
I think it's twofold, right? One is I'm starting from the position that people are not inherently malicious. So when someone does something that is not really as secure as it should be, my initial understanding and assumption is that they made it either by accident or because they didn't think that they're doing something bad. So that's on me and my team and the rest of the company to actually educate people and let them know that we have some approved tools and processes and whatever for a reason, and they shouldn't sacrifice security for their convenience. The other thing is, especially with younger people, they grew up on the internet, and the internet was a thing basically for them since forever. And although they know how to use it, they don't necessarily understand how it works. So it's not always evident to them what it means to use a service, to upload your data somewhere, to log in somewhere, to reuse the same password for convenience, to download random applications to your phone or to your computer and whatnot. Again, I recognize that it didn't have to be there when these things were being built, and we have to understand what we're building. But again, it's an awareness, and I don't like the word training, but awareness. Keep telling people, like, yeah, there is a way to do this. Let me help you, or ask me if you don't fully understand what's going on.
How do you create a culture that is security aware in a company that like the employees know to come and ask you if anything looks weird?
Yeah, so tying back to what you asked me about being the bad cop and saying no, so I don't really say no. I say yes, but let's X, Y, Z, which means you want to do that? Cool. Okay. Yes, but let's see, can we do it in a secure way? Do we have a way already today that it works or whatever? The second thing is I try very, very hard to avoid personal blame. So someone clicks on a phishing link, I will definitely not make that public. I might speak to that person and try to identify why that was the case, but I try to focus more on the problem and less on the who created the problem, because that makes the person even more defensive in the long run. And the third one, I think it stems from the top, right? So I had experiences in the past where we deployed a policy that said we shouldn't do X, and then I had the CEO doing X. And that's not great, because if people see the CEO doing X, then I think that the policy doesn't apply to anybody. And then I had to educate the management team that, look, either we have this policy and you comply, or we don't have this policy, and then this is the risk. And are you happy with that? So I think it comes from the top. Like, it's important for the CEO to either talk about these things or bring in the security to talk to the whole company. So show to the company that security is important and that people can't just brush it under the rug if they don't feel that it's convenient for them.
Interesting. Do you remember any security mistake that you've done that created some issue and then you had to deal with the consequences?
Oh, yeah.
Let me know.
All right. So that's quite early in my career, and I was working as a security consultant. So we were employed by a mobile operator company, think like Orange, O2, these type of people, to do an assessment of their infrastructure. They provided us with an IP range that we were supposed to test, and they made a mistake in the range, and we made a mistake by not confirming with them the range. So effectively, we were supposed to attack, like, let's say 250 computers, and we ended up attacking 60,000 computers. And some of the devices on that network were not really built to be attacked. So effectively, we killed mobile communications for that provider for 7 minutes for a whole country.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know if it's nice. It happened. So
What do you do after an event like that? Like, what's going in your mind? What do you actually do?
So first of all, we apologized. Second of all, we tried to see if we followed our motto, which is scripta manen, like the written stuff remains. So we did check all the communication and we did identify that that's what they told us. Of course, we should have confirmed, but at the end of the day, we also said, like, look, you told us to do this, we did this, we screwed up, we apologize, but yeah, it is what it is. So yeah, we finished the assessment. They weren't extremely happy about it, but on the other hand, they understood that if anything happened to that particular piece of network, mobile operations will die in the country. So that was a good test for them to go and fix it. They didn't really ask for it, but they got us a bonus.
That's nice. Interesting. How do you view balancing between business on the one hand, like communicating to management the needs, and actually keeping a company secure, but not creating a situation where like people can't do things?
All right. So generally, my input is three things, right? So one source of input is regulations. So if we are obliged to fulfill a standard like PCI because we handle credit cards, or because we operate in a particular region and the regulator says you need to do X, I consider these things non-negotiable. And I explain to the management that, like, okay, if we fail on this, we're not getting the license from the regulator, or we're failing the PCI accreditation. So do you agree that these are non-negotiable? Yes, great. This we're doing no matter what. The second source of information is the internal risk management. So after we have done all the basic stuff that PCI and anybody else requires is, all right, we know our system better than anyone. Where do we think we might have problems? And then we document this, we assess the risk, and sometimes we act on it, and sometimes we accept it, and sometimes we review it after a few months to decide what we're going to do. So that's the area where there's a bit of negotiation with the business, which is, sure, I see it as a risk, but maybe you guys in sales don't see it as a risk, but like, can we agree? If not, we're going to push it up to the COO or the CEO to make a decision. And then the third source is what you would call like housekeeping or best practices. And And those I try to do as much as possible. When they start introducing a lot of hassle or a lot of cost, maybe I will move them into the risk management bucket. But if it's more simple things that they wouldn't change life significantly within the company, I just try to do them with some agreement from the internal stakeholders, like, guys, I'm gonna reorganize the access groups and you lose access for 30 minutes, but after that, it's gonna be easier to handle access, or things like that. So yeah, so based on these three buckets, some of them are kind of forced, some is a negotiation, and some are not exactly optional, but also you have to be a bit cool about it. Don't go crazy.
Got it. Got it. And do you think there's like a widespread agreement overall about what you said within CISO? So do you think each person has like their own way of viewing it?
I think it's I don't think there's an agreement. Like I occasionally check LinkedIn and I see CISO job ads, and they can range from anything to you need to have 2 years of experience to you need to have 25 years of experience, and you need to be an individual contributor with hands-on to you will manage a team of 100 people and you will not touch a single server. So I think generally what the companies are looking for is someone to assume certain responsibilities about infosec or IT security, but I don't think there's an agreement. Like if you say CFO, everybody pretty much understands the same thing, right? But if you say CISO, it can be one individual contributor who also configures the firewall themselves, or it can be someone who has 20 teams and each team has 5 people and each one is really focused, one team on the firewalls, one team on identity management, one team on incident management and whatnot. So I think there's a huge discrepancy of what the role means, and you need to ask for more questions, basically, if you want to understand what's going on.
Interesting. Is that something that happened over the past few years, or was it always sort of a role where it wasn't really defined?
I think it expanded more the last few years, and the reason is that because of certain regulations and that kind of influence, more companies were forced to have someone to deal with security. If I look 20 years back, maybe even a bit more, most companies maybe had someone called chief security officer, and their job will be mostly to deal with physical security, so corporate offices, data centers, that sort of thing. And the IT security or the technical security would mostly go into some kind of a platform engineering IT department. I think they started to carve that out now, and most companies nowadays, at least the ones I see, they dropped the need for physical security because everybody moved to AWS, GCP, Azure, or something similar. Corporate offices is still a thing for some companies. Many others have moved to employee co-location or even work from home. So they started bringing in CISOs to work more with the information and the technical aspects of security and less with the physical aspects of security.
Cool. How do you feel about AI?
I mean, I don't know. I don't care.
Really? Like, because I see that sometimes CISOs are like, this is amazing. This is going to help security so much. This is wow. And the others are more like, this is going to make phishing so much more complicated. This is going to create new kinds of attacks. And
so I will, okay, let me rephrase the I do not care. So what happens at the moment is every vendor under the sun is reaching out to me and they say, our product has AI. And that part, I really do not care. So if I'm buying a product, I want it to solve a problem, and I don't really care how you do it solving the problem. So you can have AI, you can have 1 billion people working behind the scenes, you can do whatever. I'm not buying you because you have technology X. I'm buying you because I want to achieve something. So from that perspective, I think so far it has been very hyped marketing-wise, and I don't really subscribe to, oh, buy this antivirus because it has AI. Okay, great. Like, does it work? Is the obvious question. I've dabbled a bit with ChatGPT and in terms of information security. So it's a good help, right? So instead of Googling for things, I could ask ChatGPT and it will give me some examples. So good example I can bring up here is, let's say I want to write a new policy. I have an idea of how to do it, but I would like some kind of a template to bounce off. So I can either Google and download 10 templates and try to synthesize them myself, or I can ask ChatGPT and will give me some answers, and then I need to adopt them to my company. So to that extent, it works. I think problems here will arise if you don't really know what you're doing and ChatGPT spits 2 pages and you go like, sure, I'll just do that. And then you don't have the context of what you're doing. And then the other area I played with is Copilot, Claude, like code completion, these type of things. For simple things that I do, because I'm not a developer, they seem to work quite nice, and they do help me, and I don't fully understand how it happens, but I can ask the AI questions about why it made the decision, and it will give me an answer that I can understand. I don't know if we're at the point where I could trust our developers to use that code directly into production, but if it helps them become better educated, I'm all for it. Like, I'm not gonna object to an awareness tool. I just told them, like, do not copy paste that code into production unless you fully understand what it's doing.
Interesting. Do you manage a team currently?
Indirectly, yes. So I have a bunch of people that we have dubbed security champions. Generally, my preference is to not have a security team, but work with people who are either security knowledgeable or security interested and closer to the ground. Because what I have observed in the past when having a security team is that people generally took the approach of, oh, this is going to be handled by the security department. I do not need to care that much. And then they throw it over the fence, and typically that doesn't work. So in the past few companies, I work with the idea that, look, I have a security champion in the platform team. So if I want to do infrastructure improvements, that's my person. I have a security champion within finance. So if I want to do anything with the way we do security in the finance system, that's my person. And the same with development and people operations and whatnot. So they don't really report to me in the sense that I will do their annual review or anything like that, but we do work as a team to make sure that we achieve the goals throughout the company.
Interesting. So you prefer that you don't have anyone that's specifically security?
I prefer that for two reasons. One is the reason I explained, which is if you have 100 developers and you have 3-4 security engineers, these 4 security engineers cannot review and fix code from 100 developers on a daily basis, right? So it's a scaling problem. The second thing is it's way more probable that people in people operations understand the HR system than a person that I will hire in the security team. So if I want to ensure that the HR system has proper permissions, working with someone from people operations, even if they can't express themselves in technical terms, they can still explain to me exactly how they would like the system to be handled, and they can give me and other people documentation, and we can make it happen for them. The opposite of that will be I assign a security engineer. He has never seen the HR system before in their life. Like, they have no understanding of how to build permissions. Even if they do, they don't know the use cases. So it ends up like an unsuccessful project.
Interesting. That's an approach I haven't heard yet, but I can see how it makes sense. Like that you're kind of putting the responsibility between a lot of different people who have a lot of different knowledge types.
Yeah, like a good example for this is, let's say, vulnerability assessment. So me and my people would provide the tool, and we will provide the explanations of what the tool responds with. But at the end of the day, besides what the tool says, the developer will be much better to tell me, you know what, yes, the tool is right, but this will never happen because in front of that server, there is this server that will never allow this to happen. And because they're working with that on a daily basis, they will have a bit better understanding compared to me that has a more of a bird eye view.
Cool. What do you think changed about cybersecurity over like your decade? Like,
I think the fact that we don't own anything. So again, back in the day, you needed a web server, you put it in your data center. You needed a source code repository, you install something in your servers. You needed a mail server, you deploy Exchange or whatever it is. Now, everything is in the cloud, everything is interconnected. you have some knowledge or degree of certainty of where your data are flowing, but it's not very easy to understand what will be the impact of something. So if I'm using GitHub and GitHub loses one of their suppliers for 3 hours, I'm impacted, but like why? I never heard of that company. I don't understand why I'm impacted. So it became way more complex because everything now works on APIs and interconnections, and it's a way more complex mesh to understand what the impact might be if something happens anywhere in that mesh.
Interesting. Is there anything that you think CISOs tend to overlook or maybe miss?
I don't think we overlook anything. I think what we definitely miss, and I miss all the time, is when things happen and I don't know about it. So right now I'm working on a company which is remote first, which means that like the product owner and the head of engineering might now discussing something totally revolutionary that will destroy everything. And unless one of them pings me, I will not hear about it until they start writing code about it. So I think it's an information issue / problem. Maybe it was marginally better when we were all in offices and you could have lunch with your colleagues and ask them, hey, what are you working on? But I do think that's the part that I miss often. Maybe not that often nowadays, but I still miss like someone is deciding something. They haven't asked security for input. And then we go before some already made decision, and then we need to scramble to fix it.
Interesting. What do you think the field is going to look like in a few years, and what do you think the CISO role will look like? Do you think it's going to stay the same, sort of undefined, pretty open to anything term CISO, or do you think it's going to get more specific?
I don't really have like great visibility into this. I can tell you from personal experience, it will depend a lot on how much the regulators decide to act on this. So for example, in my current company, we are regulated both by US and regulators and European regulators. Now, the European regulators, they do have regulations about security, but they don't really call out any specifics related to what the CISO should be doing. Like DORA, for example, that's coming in, they do have a lot of activities, but certainly they talk about like a competent person and in this type of terms. Pretty much what GDPR did with the role of the DPO, just very high level, very vague. On the other hand, the US regulators, they do specify what they want the CISO to do. They also want to approve the CISO through some kind of an application process. So for them, it's a bit more well structured in the sense that if you're a fintech and you're having a license in the US, there is a framework that defines you as a CISO, or at least an expectation from the regulatory side of what you should be doing. So I don't know if that US mentality will prevail or the European one will prevail, but I don't think the companies will come into an agreement themselves and agree what their role is. If it's not forced externally, every company will tailor it to what they believe is their need for that role. And in terms of the field, like, I don't know, unless AI does something magical and we get to a point where we can use it and being absolutely tailored to our own business and not getting a generic answer, I don't see a lot of change. I see more need probably with people with good technical understanding because as I said, we're getting more interconnected. So maybe 5 years ago, you could just say, I understand AWS and be good enough, but now you need to know AWS and a bit of GCP and a bit of something else. And AWS is talking to GitHub and GitHub is talking to Slack. So I think the bar for technical knowledge is probably going higher.
Great. Lost my train of thought. So, what do you think is an important piece of advice for someone who is looking to get into cybersecurity or is just starting out but wanting to get to these higher levels of being CISO?
All right. I would say as a first step, kind of security has a lot of fields, and you need to figure out what you like, and what you like you're going to be doing for a very long time. So if you really want to do technical stuff, then maybe you can start as a pen tester and move from there. If you like to do technical stuff but also build things instead of destroying things, maybe you can be like a DevSecOps engineer, either focusing on infrastructure or sorry, on developing code. If you like structure and standards and approach, you can work as a security manager, like working with policies, putting processes in place, whatever. So initially, you won't be able to specialize in everything at the same time, that's for sure. So you probably need to pick something that you like and you want to drill into it. And then after you achieve some level of, I don't know if I'm going to call it mastery or familiarity with that domain, you need to start expanding to the other domains and at least get some knowledge on what's happening on that domain. So if you're an excellent pen tester, but you can't write like 2 pages of text as a document, a policy, a guideline, or even a report, then that's not going to be great. If you are great at writing policies, but you have no understanding of how they technically apply to the organization, probably you need to fix that. So find something you like, build it good, and then start expanding to the adjacent areas. And you need to get to a point where, I think it's ISC squared that says it like this, you need to be a mile wide and an inch deep, but you need to be more than an inch deep in certain areas, because otherwise you're what's the other expression? Jack of all trades, master of none, I think.
Nice. So I have one final question. Before that, thank you so much for your time. I feel like this has been very, what's the word? Like I learned a lot.
All right, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and also like you said cynical in the beginning, and I can see like the view, but I feel like you have a very light approach to it. Like you do it from a place of you understand the meaning and you understand why it's important, but you don't take it, let's say, too seriously, which is
I mean, again, it's what you can control, right? So if you can control it, sure, put in the effort, put in the time, put in the, not the stress, but the passion behind it. If you cannot control it, yeah, I don't know.
great. Okay, so my final question is you've been a CISO for more than a minute. What do
Yeah.
you like most about the job? Why do you stay so long?
So what I like most about the job is that if done as it's in my mind, you get exposure to every single part of the company. And I like learning. I like interacting with people. So being a CISO means that today I'm talking to developers, and then my next meeting will be with finance, and then I have to meet some auditors, and then I'm talking to people operations, and then I'm talking to my boss to give him a summary of what's going on. So I do love that part because you get to understand fully what the company is doing, and you can influence. Maybe not all the times it's very visible where you influence and what's the result of that, but at least you know that you tried your best either by implementing things or by consulting the company how to do things. And also, I do like that it's an ever-changing field. So I still have the energy to keep learning, to keep following up what's going on. So I do enjoy it. I don't know if that's going to be a thing in 10 years, if I will still have the energy to follow with that amount of passion. But for now, it's working and I find it enjoyable.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.